Well, Marty, we are technically live. We are streaming. We do not have viewers yet, but it turns out we will not be having any viewers from Twitter.
Uh-oh.
Error.
Why?
It just says error starting stream.
Elon, why are you such a disappointment?
Okay, we have one viewer on Facebook.
That's
Let's see
good
if
enough.
if you're watching, drop a comment so I can make sure comments are coming in. Oh, it's Doreen. Dang, I knew it was Doreen.
It's
I
got to be
don't
Doreen.
I don't know how she does it.
We are back. We've had 2 months. Well, we had 1 month off. It's been 2 months since you've seen our smiling live stream faces. Feels like longer, but it's not. It's just what happens when you take a month off. But we're back in business. While we're talking about Q&As, we'll say our next Q&A is scheduled for a Monday evening. I'm going to shake things up a little bit. We're going to go Monday evening, August 12th. Same bat time, same bat channel.
There you go.
We're trying to be on, the huge platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, but we have been alerted that this evening Twitter is not working, and you weren't able to talk back with comments or something like that anyway, right?
Yeah, I cannot send comments to Twitter, but we could get comments from Twitter. So,
Okay, there we go.
and
But
on that
it
note, we
doesn't
do
seem to
have
be.
comments coming in from YouTube, so all that's working. We've got
Okay,
yeah, we've
so
got
we got you.
Facebook and YouTube. Everything's working normal
Yeah.
on those platforms. So,
All right.
sorry.
Well, we'll see what's happening with the Twitterverse, but seems to be batting about 1,000, par for the course over there.
We'll call it X when it doesn't work. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I feel like we got a good slate deck of questions tonight. Being gone for 2 months, we don't like. I feel like we're gonna have for a Marty live stream. I feel like I may be getting ahead of myself. I may be making promises I can't keep, but I feel like I'm gonna be able to spend some time with the live convo tonight, but we will see. We've got our rapid fire response section all slated and ready to go. We've got some selected questions. We're going to try to mix in the live questions. We have set some questions aside, as we always do, for our other Bema team teachers. We set L. If I'm like, that's an L question, I set that aside. Speaking of which, I have confirmed, as much as can be confirmed at the moment, a September date for Reed. So Reed Dent will host the live stream, the September live stream. So we can all look forward to that. He's the one we haven't met on live streams yet. We've seen Elle, we've seen Josh, obviously we've seen Marty, Brent always present, and now Reed is the one that we have yet to meet. So that is our plan coming up. Anything else you would add before I just dive right in at 4 minutes past the hour, Brent Billings?
No, I I mean, I believe you that you feel optimistic about this slate of questions, but I don't
Oh,
want to
yeah.
delay you any further.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I
before we
guess
get
I'll note,
started,
if you drop any questions in the chat, I will be pulling them aside, so you don't have to repost your question
yeah.
multiple
Okay.
times. I will be watching. But with that, let's do it.
All right. This little drink pause, this little drinky poo pause, this is for Brian Trushinger.
Who is watching? He is on YouTube right now.
It's for him right there. Okay. Who day? Let's see. John opens us up. And it's like we're just gonna dive right in. First question of the live stream tonight. John sent in a question. He said, I've recently discovered the podcast. Wife and I have been working through it together. In the first 4 episodes, there have been so many things that have altered my perspective and have allowed me to understand and wrestle with the Bible differently than I have in my past growing up in the church. My one question, and I love how we get this question a lot, we've talked about it before, but I just liked how John asked it. He said, my one question is that over these 4 episodes, I have started to feel like maybe the message is that the Bible, or at least the beginning of Genesis, are just stories to help us understand who God is, and not actually things that happened. I'm not talking about 7 days versus billions of years. I more so mean the stories of Cain and Abel, or the Tower of Babel. All right, let's see here. And did he say? Let me see if that. Let me answer that part first. I think, John, you're wrestling. You're only 4 episodes in. You're already wrestling with those things. You've worded that question in a very reflective, introspective, um, self-aware, generous, hospitable way. The one word that always makes me recoil, and people have heard me say this before, is the phrase "just stories." They're just stories. Here's the thing. Stories have changed human history. Now, let me back up before I even get too far down that road. Just because they're stories that have a particular meaning or a purpose or transformative power does not mean that those stories aren't based on history. Maybe things absolutely happened those ways. What we are trying to suggest and what you are picking up, we haven't said it clearly 4 episodes into the journey, but we are trying to get us used to what you're sensing, John. And we are trying to get us used to asking a different set of questions, because we used to ask questions. I know I did when I was trained in this stuff, in the world that I was trained in. Everything was about whether or not it actually happened. Are these just stories, or did these things actually happen? Is there a historicity? And that was the question we were asking, rather than the question, why did God want to tell this story in the first place? And why did he want to tell this story this way? And what did the original audience hear when they heard those stories? What it does is, it doesn't mean that these stories didn't happen. It just makes that question less relevant. I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I just mean when we start asking a different set of questions, it's like, well, yeah, sure, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. But actually, all the goodness is in a totally different part of the story. And so I do think it's not that it's not a good question of whether it did or it didn't happen. It's that the story isn't about that. The story isn't about what happened as much as it's about what happens. The story is meant to change us. The story is meant to change the readers, not just record a historical event. And so I think you're picking up the right thing. Don't overcorrect. Don't overcorrect and simply say, oh, these are just stories and they're just kind of like fairy tales that might, have something to say to us. Or no, 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 no. We usually have 2 bad options. Either it's history or it's just a fairy tale. Like it's just a story. And there's a third option that's better than both of them. And that third option is that this is a God-breathed story about human origins, about the nature of God, about the nature of mankind and who we are. This is what has the ability to change us. So, what else did he say here? He said, are the chiasms in the hidden treasure meant to say that these are just lessons and not historical accounts? Again, doesn't mean they're not historical accounts, but it does mean there is a lesson, if we want to word it that way. There is something that's supposed to change, provoke, transform us. Am I thinking too Western? Not at all. I think you're actually starting, depending on what's happening internally. I think the way you're phrasing your question tells me you're starting to be like, ooh, I used to be used to only this one room, but now I'm realizing that this opens up to like other rooms that have more things going on in them. So it's not that you're being too Western at all. You're just realizing, you're just seeing more. That's all. Good question, John. Oh boy, I don't even know how to say this name. Natia? Nidia? I don't know. Nisha? I don't even know. Nitea. However you say it, I'm sure it's going to be epic. And you can let me know how I did, if one of those attempts was even close to right. I don't even know if it's a she. I don't even know. I am listening to episode 45. Marty has mentioned how he did a great study of Proverbs in college and mentioned that his assignment had him highlight seven. Did I say seven? 7 different themes in Proverbs. He only mentioned a couple, and I'd like to know if he remembers all 7 because I'd love to do this study for myself. That's amazing. I don't know if I said 7. My goodness, did I say 7? I don't think there was 7. I bet you could find 7 though. And don't you worry, because you know what I did today? I did what I haven't done in like 2005, 20 years. I've been saving all of my, hold on. I have 2 shelves in my library with all my old Bible college. This is one of my first freshman classes. Look at that. Christian life was basically a study in the Proverbs. I went all the way back. I pulled out off my bookshelves these old binders that I was like, why am I keeping this? Like, why am I ever going to need this? And that was fun. That was a great blast from the past. I didn't have 7. If I said 7, I was lying. I had, in the project that I have in my binder, do I have 4? I have 3. So here's the ones that I can see. Money management. I highlighted everything that had to do with money management, wealth, anything related to wealth. In a different color highlighter, I highlighted everything to do with the tongue, speech. Then I highlighted everything to do with relationships. I highlighted that. I think this would change now, but way back then, like 20 years ago, a younger version of me that wasn't as educated about anything, I had a section on, I had another color that I highlighted, whatever you want to call it, sexuality. I think now my understanding of Proverbs is I'm seeing it's probably less to do with like the immediate material sexuality, and it's more of maybe there's more stuff going on there. But I had those 4. Did I have another one? I think that might be it. I'm not seeing a 5th color. So there you go. I bet you could find 7 if you wanted to. I bet you could do it. I think I had to find whatever it was, 4 or 5. And then the final project is just 2. Like pick 2 that I thought were most relevant and then do a deeper dive. So the rest of the class was doing a deeper dive on those. So I picked money management, who knows why, and speech and words, which is definitely, always has been, always will be, one of my biggest struggles. So that was one of the ones that I did. That was fun. I have not dug into that shelf on my library since I've graduated Bible college. So there you go. I knew I was saving those binders for a reason, and you were that reason. I'm going to Finn's question. Finn says in season 3, session 3, Marty claims John the Baptist is Jesus's rabbi. He made it make sense to me, but John is only a few months older than Jesus, right? Yes, absolutely. Jesus would start at 5 memorizing Torah. Took him 25 years to be able to teach. Unless John was better at understanding Torah, would this not be a similar time frame for him? So how would Jesus spend so much time to develop that rabbi-student relationship? Absolutely. Great question. We talk about this often, kind of in different live streams and different Q&A settings. This question comes up a lot because that is the big pushback against that theory. Here's the deal. Jesus and his family, because remember, John is his cousin, right? When you look at the disciples, it is most likely based on a reference in the Gospels and then a reference in the book of Acts. When you put these things together, it's more than likely that at least 5 of the 12 disciples are at least second cousins or closer to Jesus. This is somewhat of a family business. They are somewhat of a ragtag bunch. Jesus is, John the Baptist colors outside the lines. First of all, we don't even know. There was no formal rabbis until AD 70. So we know that informal rabbis existed. They called them sages in Jewish history. So you have the sages, then you have the rabbis. When the temple is destroyed in AD 70, that's when they make capital R rabbi. prior to the destruction of the temple in Jesus' day, they're little r rabbis. They're just teachers, very respected, absolutely a thing. How much of a thing, we're all going to argue about historically. Historians are going to argue about that. Scholars are going to argue about that. But so we don't even know. When I say they color outside the lines, they're kind of rogue, they're informal, they're kicking against the norms. It's hard to even say what those norms are, or what the systems that they're kicking against, or what the boxes that they're outside of even are. So let's be honest about that. But we can say John the Baptist is not your run-of-the-mill rabbi. Remember that John the Baptist was, it seems, we can't say that this is true, but it seems, my best guess, is that Zechariah had him committed, devoted to an Essene upbringing, that there's a group of righteous priests that John was probably raised by the sons of Zadok, trained by, educated by, which means John the Baptist is going to be very, very well trained, may have very well been ahead of the curve. Many people, there's a scholar by the name of Chilton, I believe it's Bruce Chilton, who says Jesus would have been seen culturally, at least by many, as a mamzer, so he wouldn't have been brought in and accepted into the normal rabbinical school system. So if he was going to be trained, he would have had to have been trained kind of outside the box anyway. So all these things would, while the relationship is certainly not typical, but there's nothing typical about John the Baptist. This age discrepancy, it's not typical, but there's nothing typical about Jesus and his ministry. And John, I mean, there's some things that are very typical. He's very much playing by the rules. He's doing the things we would expect him to do. And yet, all of this stuff, to me, makes sense, because he's not going through the typical system. He's not following the typical stuff. So that's why I think it works. Is it odd? Absolutely, it's odd. It's absolutely odd. But it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So that's my thought. Do with that what you will. Some consider it a crazy theory. It wasn't mine. I heard it from Ray when I was studying under him on some level. And when I first heard it, I thought he was nuts. And it was like 3 or 4 years later, and I was like, golly, I think there's something to that. So there you go. Maybe you'll do the same. Maybe you'll disagree. It's the name of the game. Thinking for ourselves. I'm not seeing any live questions in this document yet, so I'm just going to keep moving. Jumping down to Benji. You guys got to spit those questions at Brent, and he'll put them in front of me. Benji says this. I don't even have my screen up, so if Brent jumped on, I wouldn't even know. Here we go. Okay. You have been so instrumental, Benji says, to my journey with Jesus. I have learned so very much listening to you teach. It's helped me understand how to read, study, and understand Scripture in ways I never knew before listening to the podcast. I absolutely love listening. We'll continue and appreciate your work deeply. Thank you, Benji. I appreciate that. I really mean that. That's not just the passing thank you, but those notes mean a lot and keep me going when I have a bad week, or I get a bad message, or somebody does something that makes me wonder, should I even be doing this? Those notes are always super helpful to me, so thank you. I wanted to ask your perspective on something. I'm currently in a men's Bible study that's going through John. This past week, we found ourselves in chapter 11. One of the things I found interesting is it's this very center point of the entire book of John, where Jesus talks about being the resurrection and the life. I'm wondering if John intentionally wrote his gospel with a chiasm in the middle. Because if so, then the chiasm in the center point of John's entire gospel is Jesus making the claim that I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he dies, yet shall live. I found this so fascinating and exciting, because if John intentionally did that, then the entire gospel of John points to needing to realize that Jesus is the one who resurrected and has the power to resurrect our lives if we believe in who he is. If the tomb is empty, it's vital for our faith in Jesus' kingship. Then how amazing for John to center his gospel on the importance of the resurrection and Jesus' question of, do you believe this? Yeah, it's a great possibility. Here's the things that I will say. First of all, Benji, in season 6, we are going to go through John verse by verse. It's going to take us about a year, just under a year, to go through that journey on the podcast together, but we will go kind of through everything. You're going to learn all kinds of stuff in that journey, that verse by verse journey through John. One of the things you're going to learn is that a lot of scholars, and I love the theory and I use it, split the book of John into two different books. Not that John was two different volumes, but they say John has two different sections, two different parts. Part one is what they call the book of signs. There are 7 signs, essentially 7 miracles that lay out essentially the book of signs. And then on the backside, you have the book of hours, or the book of glory. And that is essentially the first half of the book of signs is, do you believe who Jesus is? Essentially, it closes with this resurrection story. The book of signs closes with this in John 11, and it closes with the question, do you believe this? So the book of signs, the first half of John, is John essentially saying Jesus is the bread of life, Jesus is a good shepherd, Jesus is the door, Jesus is resurrection of life. Jesus is not the vine. That would be in the book of glory. Jesus is all these things. Do you believe that that's who Jesus is? If you do, book of hour, book of glory, this is what it's going to mean. If you believe that Jesus is who he says he is, then what he's inviting you to do is he's inviting you to walk a path. Walk a path of persecution, walk a path of embodying the gospel, all that kind of stuff. I say all that because, and then there's other theories. So at the very end of that gospel of John, verse by verse journey, we do a couple interviews, and one of them is with Dr. Gary Burge, who's considered to be one of the preeminent John scholars alive and at work today. Certainly not the only one, but one of the top. And we had this amazing and great conversation. We use his book as kind of a great resource. It's what we recommend for our verse by verse journey. And in the book, one of the things we talk to him about, and one of the things you read about, is that a lot of literary scholars notice that in John, there is what they call literary seams. Literary seams. So in their mind, what's happened is that John used to be in one order, and then John got rearranged, and they maybe literally, but maybe not literally, but think metaphorically, they cut this part of John's scroll and they moved it over here. So they kind of cut up John's scroll, they rearranged it, and you ended up with the John that we have today. You don't have to agree with that or any of those things, but that would be relevant to your question about chiasms. Was if there is a chiasm, I'm not sold there is a chiasm in John. Brian David is probably watching and he's probably like, there's a chiasm everywhere. I'm not sold that there's a chiasm in John. I do think it's the capstone to the book of signs. I do think it has a prominent place. I think it's a big deal. If there is a chiasm, it could be that the book of signs and the book of glory form a chiasm. That would not be the first time we've seen that. That would totally make sense. It could be that that John originally had a chiasm and then the scroll got rearranged. It could be that John had a scroll and it got rearranged into a chiasm. So the answer is it could be. I have looked, and I if I wanted to find it, if I wanted to see it, I think I could see some options. If I'm more honest and objective, I'm not sold yet that I think there is, either by John or by a restructured redactor. I don't see a chiasm. I do see two books. I do see an absolute method to the madness. I do think it's brilliant. I'm not convinced it's a chiasm yet. Do with that what you will. There are plenty of people that do see a chiasm. So you, Benji, are in good hands, and you absolutely could be on top of something, and you could be right, and I could be wrong. Here's a live comment question.
Marty, I'm breaking in. You didn't see it.
Oh, didn't see it.
Brian is indeed in the chat. He's on Facebook. So, Benji, if you watch this on Facebook, you'll find Brian in the comments. He does confirm chiasms everywhere. And he specifically says,
okay, yeah, nice.
He specifically says ABCCAB for this one.
Okay.
So, Benji, if you want to find Brian David in the chat and get a hold of him, I'm sure he would love to send you what he has on this.
Brian does love his chiasms. Brian hasn't even heard about what we're doing with our live stream. I've got a fun little ditty for Brian, and he doesn't even know about it. So hopefully he's still my friend in a little bit, and that's a joke because we're going to be friends. And I'll be able to talk him into a fun little live stream game that we're going to play soon in the future, everyone, in the future. Okay.
Well,
Let
Marty,
me
you
just.
got your wish. We're 10 questions deep on live, so
Yes.
you better put on your racing tires.
All right, here we go, Martha. I've been wondering lately about Joseph's second dream. When the sun, moon, and 11 stars bow down, Jacob's interpretation that they represent Joseph's parents and brothers seems problematic since Rachel wouldn't have been alive. Was Jacob referring to Leah or maybe Bilhah and Zilpah? That's a great question, Martha. I don't have a wonderful, solid answer. I don't think that it's talking about some future event where everybody physically comes and bows down to them. So I don't have a hard time with him saying, with him thinking Rachel, even though she's deceased and passed on at that point, doesn't bother me at all. The other thing that would lend credence to that theory that I have is the ancient world in lots of different cultures in different ways. Nuances are different. I'm sure L. Grover Fricks could speak to this even better than I could. But they saw, I know this is true in the Roman world. I'm almost positive it goes all the way back to Egypt and Babylon. There are two different flavors to this understanding that predate and go back to the time of Genesis. They understood their ancestors to be stars. So if he's having a dream about stars, sun and moon and 11 stars and all those kinds of things, you would automatically be thinking in that ancient world, those are family members, those are ancestors. And again, I don't think he's saying there's going to be a thing that's going to happen in the future where all of you are going to come and physically bound down. I think there's a more poetic, more metaphorical meaning to the dream, which is I'm going to be in a place of authority and like God's going to do something in my life and through my life. And he obviously doesn't know what that's going to be. We do, because we know the spoiler alerts, but that's how I read it. Could it be Leah? Absolutely. Bilhah and Zilpah? Absolutely. I think what he's seeing is his actual mom, Rachel, and he's not necessarily seeing living people doing literal bowing downs, but he's making a greater point about who he is and who he's going to become in the story. Let's see, what does she say? I lean towards the interpretation that the sun, moon represent governments instead of representing Joseph's parents, but I'm still left with the question of why Jacob referred to Joseph's mother in his own. Yeah, yeah. My problem with that idea, and it could be, is that unless we think that Joseph got his interpretation wrong, the text seems to insinuate that it is parental figures on some level. But now that I say that, I could see that the whole story of Joseph's going to be about Pharaoh being his new father. I mean, I could see. It's possible. Good thinking, Martha. All right, I'm going down to Elias's question. Good evening, Marty. I'm a Gentile, married to a Jew, and we've been practicing Messianic Judaism for about 8 years. I've acquired a lot of material in those 8 years, was delighted to find yet one more I could sink my teeth into. Thank you for your time on these episodes. Every listen is informative and a delight. I have enjoyed sitting down with my family and just pausing to talk through the episodes. My entire family is Reformed Calvinists. I'll just stop there and say that's the tradition that I was raised in. I wouldn't say my family was theological. They weren't theologians in nature. That's not how they oriented themselves to their faith, so they couldn't have really cared less about their Calvinism. But I grew up in Dutch Reformed world, so mainline Reformed Church of America, Dutch Reformed Church is where I spent almost all of my adolescence and a little bit younger than that, being raised in that. Went to Bible college, very, very committed to a 5-point hyper-Calvinism. That was my theological. I was before I was learning any of this contextual stuff. Before I spent any of my time with Ray, before any of that. And I don't have this deep hatred for the world that raised me. But more on that in a moment. I even have friends that moved to Moscow, Idaho. Hey, I used to live there. I don't anymore, for anybody who's curious. Brent still does. Brent is still in Moscow. I am not. In June of 20, if you haven't gotten to that spot in the podcast, I moved to Cincinnati. So I'm now in Cincinnati, but I spent almost exactly 10 years in Moscow doing campus ministry. And they moved there to be with a particular Reformed community there. Yes, we are very aware of that community. I am curious about your connection at all to that community and how you navigate that relationship. I'm not affiliated with that particular church or church community, depending on how much people follow. They're a pretty well-known community. They do a lot of curriculum creation, creating of curriculum and content for homeschool systems. They are very committed to a classical theological approach. There's a seminary that they run and a publishing house, a seminary there in Moscow. No connections for me. My Reformation background was a different Reformation. Like that's considered like a neo-Reformation approach. I was from more of a traditional mainline Reformation approach. I have friends that go to that church. I know some of the people that lead that church, but no connection there. And people ask me that a lot because it will often make the news or be well known. We are not doing the same thing typically. Not doing the same thing. So not connected to that group. They will not be using the same hermeneutic that we're using. They're going to be using a very classical, reformed hermeneutic, a theological hermeneutic. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's definitely not what Bema is doing. It also isn't like diametrically opposed sometimes to what Bema is doing. So I've always had a lot of great conversations with the students at New St. Andrews, but when it all shakes down to how we apply it and how we live it out, particularly in our social settings or faith expressions, we're usually on wildly different pages. I'll just put it that way. And we'll let Jesus do the weeding. How about that? So yeah, I have been accused of being a heretic. My parents' fear for my salvation. Yeah, I get that. I would enjoy hearing your thoughts on this, and if you have any wisdom to share. Yeah, I've been through some of those circles, not the same one you're referring to, but other ones like it. Those are hard things, and oftentimes we go on journeys, and people are not on the same journey we're on, and most of the time they're not supposed to be, and we have to be true to the stuff we're learning and be honest and pursue those convictions, and sometimes that puts strain on. And that's hard. And there's no easy answer to that. Paragraph goes on. I would enjoy hearing your thoughts on this. If you have any wisdom to share specifically regarding Reformed theology. Reformed theology is not the problem. Let me just say that. Reformed theology, I learned everything. I met Ray, the connections I had to Ray Vanderlaan, all through a Reformed church. Ray was deeply Reformed, deeply Calvinistic, ordained Reformed minister to this day. Reformed theology is not the problem. All Western theology, if you know anything about Bema, if you've listened to Bema long enough, you know that I don't have a love affair with any of Western theology. I think all Western theology has something beautiful to bring to the table, but all of it's kind of asking a lot of the wrong questions, packaging the wrong stuff in the wrong ways. Again, that doesn't make it wrong or bad. It just means it's incomplete. It's often misleading. I want to repackage, reframe is a word I use a lot. I want to reframe things theologically in wildly different ways. But Reformed theology is not a barrier to that. It doesn't get in the way of me being able to ask these questions. I can remember when I was younger in my Reformed church, and I was getting all wound up about theology, especially my first year in Bible college. And I was like 5-point hyper Calvinism. And my mentor and my pastor at my Reformed church back home, who was a real Ray Vanderlaan disciple, just kept saying, Marty, this stuff just doesn't matter. You're asking the wrong question. You're having the wrong conversation. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't even know. Blah, 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 blah. I was the typical Reformed Theo bro back then. This is the only thing that matters. How could that? But now I totally get what my mentor and pastor was trying to say. Like, the Bible's not having that conversation. You keep trying to get the Bible to meet you on your terms, And you should really try to meet the Bible on its terms. And that's not a condemnation. That's not some heavy-handed critique. It's not that this is the only hermeneutic that there's lots of perspectives that matter. Reformed theology is not the problem. How you hold Reformed theology can be a problem. How you hold Arminian theology can be a major problem. It doesn't matter what Western theology you plant your feet in, what Western theology you find your anchor in. That will not be the problem. What will be the problem is how you hold it, what you do with it, what you believe God is doing in the world, and what your theology is making out of you, like how you're being discipled in that theology. That will be the problem. It's either love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, or it's arrogance, it's fits of rage, it's divisiveness, it's anger, it's malice, it's envy. It's either kingdom or it's like some theological system, or it's the kingdom of God. So those are just, there's no easy answer. Reformed theology is not the problem. You don't have to run from that. I tell the people this all the time. I right now, I find my theological home in a independent Restoration Movement Stone Campbell church, an independent Christian church. You couldn't be further away on the theological spectrum from Reformed theology than where I'm at today, as far as where I worship and go to church and find my home. But people freak out when I say this. I could go right back home and work at my Reformed church tomorrow, because I know where Reformed theology comes from. I know on its best day why it is what it is. I know why we do what we do, and there's beauty in it, just like there's beauty in what I do now. So those pieces are not the problem. But what Jesus is doing through our faith expressions, all these things are just scaffolding. It's all just a framework, a structure to hang the stuff that matters on. So hang it on Reformed theology, hang it on Arminian theology, hang it on but let God do the thing that God's been trying to do through his people. Do that. And that's why I think it's anyway. Now I'm just rambling. Let's see here. Jeff says, probably a live question, almost like how you hold your theology will always be known by its fruit. Absolutely, Jeff. Yes. And this is what Jesus says in his teachings, both in the Sermon on the Mount and elsewhere. He says it more than once. He says, you will know a tree by its fruit. And you don't determine the fruit. The fruit is the fruit of the practice. It's orthopraxy. It's not orthodoxy. You do not judge a teacher at any point in any of Jesus's teachings by orthodoxy. And that doesn't mean that orthodoxy doesn't matter. Please don't mishear me. There's right and there's wrong. I'm not saying that anything goes. I'm just saying that Jesus said you don't judge a theology or a teacher by its orthodoxy. You judge it by its orthopraxy. Because you can be dead right and have no Holy Spirit in it. You can be dead right and not be like Jesus. And then you're not right at all. Doesn't matter how theologically pure it is. If it's not full of the Holy Spirit and making you and others more like Jesus and leading to liberation and rescue and redemption, then it's whatever it is. It's not Jesus. It's not truly orthodox. So yes, and I could just rant. On that, but nevertheless, Brian was on Facebook. Were they supposed to go up the mountain in Exodus 19? In Exodus 19. Oh, I think he's saying there's an Exodus 19 chiasm. Is that related to the John conversation? Exodus 19. Were they supposed to go up the mountain in Exodus 19?
I think I assume what happened when he said the ABCCAB, I think on Facebook he probably replied to his original question about Exodus 19, but I can't see when something is a reply the way it funnels comments in. So I thought that was connected to John. I think this is completely separate from John. So forget about John.
All right. Well, I'm going to forget about John. Exodus 19. All right. I'll bite. Brian. And there's okay. And you think that comment, there's actually an Exodus 19 A, B, C, C, A, B. Chiasm. Do, 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 do. And when he says they, is he referring to the small group or the people? This is one of my favorite chapters because God keeps just saying, come up to the mountain. And then the moment he gets up to the mountain, God sends him back down. He says, go down, tell the people. And so he does. And then God's like, come up on the mountain. So Moses goes up on the mountain. And then God's like, go down. Like the first words out of God's mouth half the time are go down. I just love. If I was Moses, I'd be like, hey, can you tell me that while I'm down there? That'd be great. Thanks. I would have to know more about the exact reference or what Brian is so clever. Brian's a better rabbi than I am. Like Brian will out rabbi the rabbi all the time. So I'm always like, how is Brian Jesus juking me right now? I'm probably overthinking it. But let me know if he puts any more clarifying goodies in the comments, Brent. Because I'm having a hard time finding a verse that might be under question. And maybe he's just given us a little trail of breadcrumbs for other people to find awesome chiasms. Exodus 19, A, B, C, C, A, B. All right. Love it. All right, Jordan. Going to Jordan's question. Jordan says, I was reading Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the Parashah companion to Exodus, and in one of the essays, he talks about the 4 cups of wine at Passover. I know, I just read this recently. I was just going through all of Jonathan Sacks' work, and I don't know, it was probably earlier this year, February-ish, I was doing Exodus, and I saw him do that. And he talked about the 5th cup of wine, which was Elijah's cup. He does something a little bit different than with Elijah's cup, than what I was taught with, but it's very similar, which I loved seeing it from somebody outside the Ray circle. I don't recall this being talked about in Bema. That's because some material, Jordan, I keep some stuff packed away. I don't put it all on the podcast because you got to have some surprises. And that's one of my surprises. But after doing a brief Google search about what the cups were about, I had this question. When Jesus was celebrating Passover before his arrest, do you think he used Elijah's cup when he broke the bread and took the cup? If so, what are the implications of him doing so? I could be way off track, and maybe the Elijah cup wasn't a thing yet in Jesus' time, but thought I would ask. Jordan, this is the ending to the Seder meal that I give. I have 3 different endings, but my go-to ending, if I have not done a Seder meal with your group before, if I ever come, the 5th cup, Elijah's cup, is the climactic ending that I do to my Passover Seder. So I definitely have the teaching. I did talk about it some on this year's Passover video. Jordan, I talked about it. So Brent's going to link that in the comments if you get to see that. He's going to put a link to it was about 2 months ago ish. This Passover, I did a video and I talked about that ending. You can also see a better version of it. This is Ray Vanderland's DVD series. This is the volume called The Path to the Cross. And the last of 5 lessons on that DVD, the 5th cup, Our Way of Hope. And you can watch RVL do that teaching, which is where I originally heard it from. So yes, there's all the goodies that you need to know about the 5th cup. Will I say more here on the live stream? No, because now you have all the goodies and you can go listen for yourself. And I have to keep some stuff back behind the curtain. If I show all the tricks, I don't have anything to do when I come visit your church. All right. Oh, is this the passage from Exodus, Brent? Is that what this is in here in the Google Doc? You're just
Yeah,
dropping weird verses into the Google Doc.
I was trying to get it highlighted, and then you started talking about links, so I had to go over and link everything. I
All
only
right.
have so many hands. Okay, so he said 10 lines up with 14, 11 lines up with 15. So there's your A, B, and then 12 and 13 are your center.
Oh, I see. Okay, so we're talking about Exodus 19. If anybody wants to go find this on their own, Exodus 19, 10 through 15. 10 and 11 are AB, 14, 15 are AB, which Foreman would say, if he sees that, it's really just A. That's how he loves to talk about it.
Not
So
quite. Not
AB,
quite.
what's that?
I'm getting your highlights here.
Yep.
This is what he's talking about.
Yes, that is exactly what I was explaining, Mr. Billings. So
Oh,
you have
okay.
AB and then C and then AB. And then Foreman loves to say whenever you have because he calls that imperfect chiasms. And Foreman likes to say every imperfect chiasm is a perfect chiasm in disguise. So Foreman would say when you see, because you're expecting A, B, C, B, A is what you're expecting. But then you have A, B, C, A, B. And Foreman says that just means that AB isn't actually AB, it's just A. You're supposed to see those two parts as related. And Foreman's case is when you see an imperfect chiasm that's a perfect chiasm, that means that those two pieces being related are really, really important. Like that's a key to understanding the chiasm, because you would want to see it A, B, C, B, A, but these are supposed to be linked in order. So this says, the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today, have them wash their clothes, and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of the people. And then in 14, after Moses had gone down the mountain, he consecrated them and they washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, prepare yourselves on the, yeah, so those are definitely parallel. Absolutely. And Foreman's case would be the consecration and preparation are for some reason linked. So the middle of the chiasm becomes put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain. So the approach, the reference to approach could be absolutely a part of the chiasms. Then you'd have A, B, C, D, C, A, B, or in Foreman language, A, B, C, B, A, which means the center would end up being whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. Potentially they are to be stoned or shot with arrows. I have to actually look at the Hebrew to see if there's a center, 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 center. But yeah, I think Brian's question, are they supposed to go up on the mountain? I don't think the people are. And I can't remember how this falls.
This almost has a little bit
Uh,
of a Genesis 2 and 3 situation where it's like, don't approach the mountain or touch the foot of it.
yeah,
But then later it says when the ram's horn sounds, they may approach, but it doesn't talk about touching.
right, right, absolutely. And I think there's all kinds of things that make all that stuff make sense. I wanted to say, if I remember right, there was something in the Exodus narrative where God, that was a response from God. Like God was going to uh like they were invited and then they decide they want to take a particular posture, kind of like what Deuteronomy goes over. And then God says, okay, it's kind of like a binding and loosing. God says, okay, if that's how you want to do it, then that's what we'll do. But here's the deal. And then that's when he utters this. And so I think the answer to your question, Brian, is no, they weren't supposed to go up on the mountain. By the time we get here, I think there is a discussion about whether or not they were originally, whether or not God was open. There's some rabbinical conversation about that. All right, enough about that. I'm moving on to YouTube comment from Nicole. She said, should Christians follow all of the law observing Sabbath and holy days? I have family that says all the laws should be observed and that Christ did not do away with the law. And they quote Matthew. Oh boy, if we're ever quoting proof texts, we just know we're in shaky ground, because you can proof text literally anything. You can literally proof text anything you want to do. So we definitely, Nicole, go over this in session 4 very, very, very deliberately. I wanted to do it very thoroughly. It's a very hard concept to unpack, because no matter which group we're coming from, we assume that we see it really clearly. And there's a whole lot of new scholarship in the last 20 or 30 years that's given us a lot of clarity, like objective academic clarity on some things that a lot of people had already formed opinions on 20, 30 years before that. And so we do go over that. The study in Galatians. So we're going to do a study in Acts at the beginning of session 4, and that leads into a verse-by-verse journey through Galatians, which then leads into a verse-by-verse journey of Romans. That journey is hopefully going to get some clarity to your question. I'm not going to be able to unpack it all in a live stream. I will say that I'm not Hebrew roots. I don't believe that a Gentile, a person who is not ethnically Jewish, is supposed to be following the law or Torah. I do believe that an ethnic Jew who sees themselves as a part of the covenant people are supposed to follow that. If that's at all confusing to anybody, you just hold on. You just keep on listening. It's not, I mean, I know we've heard different things before. There's this wacky group and there's that wacky group. It's neither one of the wacky groups. It's a school of theology of the last 20 or 30 years called New Perspective on Paul. We're starting to understand what Paul was doing with a Second Temple Jewish perspective. So we will unpack that in session 4. I promise it will be worth the wait. So just hang in there. Now, Nicole, your question is actually very specific. So I answered it in a general sense, as far as just like kosher law, like eating kosher, wearing tassels. You asked a question specifically about Sabbath and holy days. Sabbath for me is a general creation-based principle. Sabbath, as you've written it here, and with a little s, is a rhythm of creation that has nothing to do with being Jewish. It's just a part of its creation. It's built into animals and the land. It is this Sabbath rhythm that God wired into all of creation. So I'm not talking about some legalistic worship, church, ecclesiological day. I'm talking about a rhythm of 6 days on and 1 day off, 6 days on and 1 day off, 6 days on and 1 day off. Then there's what I would call the Sabbath with a capital S, the Jewish Sabbath. It starts on Friday at sundown. It's going to start tomorrow night when the sun goes down. It's going to go till sundown on Saturday night. That is the Jewish Sabbath. There is a Jewish observance of a Jewish Sabbath for Jewish people. They're going to light candles on Shabbat. They're going to say some blessings. They're going to engage in the Sabbath in a particular way, very Jewish ways. I would personally caution against Gentiles participating in Jewish observance. It feels to the Jew, it's very like there's a lot of appropriation that happens there. Like if we as Americans were to engage in indigenous Native American practices, it would feel like, you probably shouldn't do that. Don't do that. Christians have this weird relationship with Judaism. It makes it a little convoluted. But I think one of the things we're hearing from our Jewish brothers and sisters is, hey, if you're not under the Sinai covenant, could you not play with our covenant? And I think there's something to be said for that. The next great question is what you say, holy days, festivals, holidays. Should we celebrate Jewish holidays? Again, I think the danger is in the appropriation. I think the danger is that we take something that's deeply Jewish and meaningful, and then we, when I say we, I mean Christians, as a people group that have crushed Jews under the boot of empire, persecution, mistreatment, violence, we now take their holidays and we kind of treat them as Jesus-laden playthings. And I think we've got to be really careful about that kind of stuff. Are those hard lines? They are for me, but I wouldn't put that on anybody else. I just caution us. I would caution us to think about that. If it's the part of the law that makes you Jewish, that's the part that I would say you stay away from if you're a Gentile. If you're ethnically Jewish, then that's who you are. It's part of your identity. It's a part of the covenant relationship you have with God. It's a part of how you pursue that relationship with him. But if you're not, I think the teaching of the New Testament is very clear. If you're not an ethnic Jew, then you're a part of the same family, but you don't, Paul says, you don't take on the works of the law, because then you would take the teeth out of the gospel. The gospel is that Jew and Gentile come together. And the Gentiles don't become Jews when they come together. The gospel is that both Jew and Gentile, Ephesians, God has broken down the dividing wall of hostility between who? Jew and Gentile. It's Ephesians 2, verse 11 through 22. That whole conversation is about Jew and Gentile. So that's what it's tricky. We will unpack it very deliberately and hopefully very clearly in session 4. So keep on listening, Nicole. We'll try to get you lots of. All right, one more question, and then a live question, and then we're going to do our break, and we're going to move our rapid fire response section to after the break. So Cheryl has a question. I'm new to the podcast and find it fascinating, but I was disappointed when you were discussing Genesis 3:16. You read it as God telling Eve that he would increase her pain in childbearing, but the word used in the original text was conception, not childbirth. Unfortunately, Cheryl, you're wrong, but we'll talk about that in a moment. You're right, but you're also wrong. So we'll look at that. The word used in the original text was conception, not childbirth. So what God really said was, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. God does say that. That is absolutely exactly what God says. But then he goes on to say more. Not that he would increase her pain in childbearing. That's actually what he says next. It has been translated wrong. It actually hasn't. And increasing Eve's conception is a good thing, not a curse. That would be true if that's what the Hebrew was insinuating. I'm not sure we have that liberty, but we'll look at it and you can decide. God never said he would increase her pain in childbirth. He actually did. Other than this particular error, I'm being kind of facetious, Cheryl. I'm winking at you. Okay. Wink. It's okay. Did I wink or did I blink? What did I do? I can't see both eyes. There you go. Okay. Other than this particular error, I really enjoy the podcast. That's good. Let's look at it, Cheryl. Let's look at it to make sure we're right. Okay. I'm going to share my screen, Brent. I don't know if you have to do anything, but I'm going to share my screen. Ciao. All right. Here's our 3:16. Cheryl, here's all the words down here if we want to get into it. I'm going to try to stay up here so we can see the verse and not just the root words broken down here. So, to the woman, he said, greatly I will increase. And exactly what you said. Right here is what you said. I will increase your sorrow and conception or pregnancy. That's absolutely correct. That is exactly the phrase. What you said was exactly the phrase that shows up here. So I'm going to create your sorrow and conception. So sorrow and conception are linked. Now it could be that he's going to increase her sorrow and her conception, kind of as separate, a negative and a positive. That's possible. It would be a weird way to word it in the Hebrew, but it's possible, except that's not where it ends, Cheryl. There's a phrase that comes immediately after it, and it's a modifying phrase. So it's not a new statement. It's not a new idea. The next word is in pain. So not sorrow, because we already used sorrow over here. He's going to increase their sorrow and their conception. And then continuous thought in the Hebrew, linked idea. So this is modifying what was just said. In pain, you will bring forth sons. So it actually does say in the very next 3 words, very literally, in pain, you will bring forth sons. Now, here's what I love about your question, is because we have always thought it's about pain and childbirth, but that's really not what's being said. And all the rabbis have pointed this out for thousands of years, centuries. Bringing forth sons does not typically refer to the act of childbirth itself. It refers to the act of raising, child rearing, not childbearing, not the birth, not the birthing process, but the raising and the rearing process. So I do love your question because it allows me to talk about something that I didn't talk. When I'm on the podcast, I'm not talking about every little single nuance that could be found in the Hebrew because we'd never get through anything. We could talk about every verse for the next 3 months. We could talk about one verse for just 3 months. Like there's always so much to talk about. So we didn't talk about it on the podcast, but one of the things we do get to point out now that you've brought it up is that the act of raising children in a world that's subject to, I'll call it the curse. Use a different word if you need to. In a fallen world, the act of raising children will be a painful process. And it's not talking about the physical act of giving birth. I hear that's painful too. But what's being said in Genesis is it's going to be painful to raise. And so that's connected to I will greatly increase your sorrow and conception. In pain, you will raise children. That's a continuous thought. Those aren't independent thoughts. You could make them independent thoughts by adding a vav at the beginning, like they do right here. So the very next word starts with a vav. That's a new thought. So that clause is actually all connected there. So to the woman, he said, I will greatly increase your sorrow and conception. In pain, you will raise sons. You will bring literally, I mean, halachas to go. You will go forth sons. You will bring forth sons. You will send forth, not send, there's actually a word for send, but you will raise child rearing. So there you go, Cheryl. It actually does say that. It did say what you said it said. That is absolutely correct. You are not incorrect with that. But it did also say what I said. So I guess we could say we were both right. Larissa said, would you have a word for miscarriages? That is a fantastic question for L. They would probably just talk about a son or a daughter that died in childbirth. There would be other ways to say it rather than I know they have a word now in modern Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, I don't know. They could. That's a great question for L. Could that be sorrowful conception? Could sorrowful conception mean that? I don't think so. Just the idea of sorrows and conception being linked, possibly, absolutely, maybe. It's a great question for L. L would be both better with the feminine conversation and B, more knowledgeable of what the Hebrew means and what other words exist. That's a great question. The rest of the I am not the right person to answer. Facebook question from Molly. Could you go over the armor of God? I'm studying how to comprehend and use it. Oh, the armor of God. Well, my favorite teaching, I don't think it was Ray's. I heard it from Ray, but I've heard it from other people too, is when it comes to the armor of God. In today's Christianity, we have an awful lot of Christian streakers. I love that joke. Everybody has the helmet of salvation and nothing else. So we're supposed to have all these other pieces, right? We're supposed to have the breastplate of righteousness. We're supposed to have the shoes of the gospel of peace. We're supposed to have the belt of truth. Here's the cool thing I would say about the armor of God. I was on a trip with Ray. There was 2 or 3 Marines. One of them that was an active duty Marine. Was he active duty? I can't remember, but he was a Marine. And he said, what's interesting about the armor of God is that it's the entire checklist of Roman armor that Rome would issue a soldier. Everything is there except for one piece. And he said that in the Roman list, it's listed separately. You have the sword and the sword sheath. So everything else, helmet, breastplate, belt, shoes. I know I'm missing something. Sword, and then you have the sheath. In the passage of Ephesians 6, there's no sheath. Now, I don't know if that's just an oversight, if that's not what Paul understood as the whole list, or if Paul intentionally left it out. Because if he intentionally left it out, that's good. That is really good. Because what he's essentially saying is you don't ever put the sword of the Spirit away. The sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. You need to always have the Word of God out. You need to always have the Word of God out so that the Spirit can work. There's never a time you're going to put the sword away. You're not going to need a sheath. There is no sheath in the armor of God. We could be extrapolating, making too much out of that, but I have always loved that little ditty. Okay, we always pause at the top of the hour, and we always pause just to say thank you to our donors. We pause to say we recognize how many people give. Oh, shoot. I was going to have Brian's fun little spreadsheet that he has. It's always fun to see how many gifts come in, what the average gift size is. We have so many people just giving small gifts that makes such a huge, huge difference. Our average gift used to be what we would call industry standard for nonprofits, $75 a month would be our average recurring gift. Our average recurring gift now is like closer to 20, maybe even getting closer and closer to 10. because do you have it, Brent?
Well, it's the funny thing about this is it says all numbers are real except the Jeff numbers in green, and the Jeff numbers in green are the ones you want. Because I have 44, but that's not quite it, I think.
Yeah, I just know it's been dropping consistently. And what that means is the cool part of that isn't that, I mean, it's like, you just said the size of gift. Yes, but there's so many of those gifts coming in. It's just making such a huge difference. And we're able to hire all these people. And we were able to pay Brent when we set out to do that. And now get Brent more help and Brian. And we're just deeply grateful for that. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff this fall. We've got season 9 that's going to get started. We've got Chosen season 4 that we got to do commentary on. We're going to start a reboot project, ladies and gentlemen. That's going to happen this fall. We are rebooting. We're going to take the whole Bema teaching team. And we're going to go back to season 1 and eventually, hopefully, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to try to do the whole body of work. But we're going to reboot each season at a time. And we're going to start releasing season 1 reboot. And we'll let you know. We're going to do a big promo blitz and let you guys know when that gets started. For all of you that are been Bema-ites from the beginning and you'll want to hear the new stuff and you're going to go back and start listening to the new stuff as well. So we're going to talk all about that, but all that is possible because we're able to take a little bit of time, have more people helping us, do hopefully good stuff and take care of people really well while we do it. And so it's your gifts and your generosity that make that a reality, your donations. And we always just want to say thanks because it makes the difference. Brent, what are you going to say?
It's great. I'm here, which is a huge blessing, and we are doing a lot. And so I am hoping to get more help. So we have more plans and more dreams. And so if you haven't started giving yet and you want to, we do have something to do with it. We're not
Absolutely.
we're not done. We're just we wait until God gives us the resources and the direction, and then we move forward with that.
Yeah, we definitely have big needs this year, and we'll need those donations this next year. I will put it that in ways that we haven't in the last few years. We made some decisions that we thought were healthy decisions that honored the giving that had been done up to this point. We got out a little bit ahead of things rather than sit back and wait. So we'll definitely need that financial support. And here's what I really want you guys to know. Listen, Brian Trushinger works for Impact. And as long as he works for Impact, he's got to look at this every day. I make sure of it. He gets to look. That's what your gift goes to right there. Because Brian Trushinger needs to see that every single day. That's a joke. That's not what your gift goes to. Only it kind of does because he has to show up to work every day and see me be me. So there you go. Thanks for your generosity, everybody. Do you have anything else for the
I have a couple
station
of
identification?
live encouraging comments from the chat that I just wanted to share.
Okay, I'm here for
This one
that.
comes from Liz Doriga. Hello from Asia. I'm one of a group living all over a country in East Asia, which shall remain unnamed. This Eastern understanding of faith is so deeply helpful and valuable to what we do in cultural contextualization, and is personally deeply blessing a group of us so much. Where we live isn't always easy, but your teachings are a big encouragement to us.
Oh
So
yes, what I'm talking about. Bam. Okay, I
thank
love
you.
that.
Like, we love to hear that kind of stuff. Like, that's why we do what we do, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what we do with your support is help people all over the world. It's crazy. In
Yeah.
places that it's like, well, what do we isn't that an Eastern culture? What do we have to say to that? Well, turns out it's still helpful.
Yep.
And
Totally.
then also Alyssa Otto says, Brent and Marty, just wanted to thank you both for all the time you spent on this podcast and teaching all of us. I've grown so much in my walk with God since beginning listening, which I've recently learned is only 2 months ago. And to answer your question, yes, the chosen commentaries are within the podcast. I think you'll find season 1 in session 6, and 2 is also in 6, and 3 is in 7, something like that. But they're there. And 4 hopefully coming soon. We got a little bit delayed with their legal issues. So
Yep.
we'll get back to it when we can. but it is coming. It's on our books.
I haven't watched season 4 yet, Brent. I've been stuck watching The Acolyte, but we just watched episode 8 last night, so
Mm.
I think I'm ready to move on to The Chosen. Is that
All right.
bad? I feel like a pagan sinner.
Well, we don't need a full accounting of everything you've watched, Marty. We'll
Yeah.
we'll let people.
Yeah, we better stop there with The Acolyte. I'll put it
Yes. So anyway, thank you for that. People starting the podcast today. Like Alyssa's already 2 months ahead of everyone who started today, and
Yep.
there's a lot. Like every single day, somebody's starting it, and that's why we continue to do what we do. We love the people who are caught up and with us with the current conversation, and we love the people who are just starting because it's a beautiful journey whenever you get started.
Amen to that. All right, Brent, we know what time that is. It's time for our segment.
Are you ready? Does it work on the computer that you're on?
Oh man, I wish. Hold on. I know what you're
Can
looking
you
for.
make it
I know
work?
what you're
Can you make it
fishing
work?
for. It doesn't work on Ecamm, I don't think.
Oh no. Okay, well,
Yeah.
anyway, audio only. You'll just have to imagine the lasers playing behind Marty. But it's
Dang
time
it.
for. Oh man, I wasn't in the right thing.
Rapid fire responses.
There you
If the Mac was doing its thing, I get lasers in the back, and that would have been the only more epic thing we could have done for our theme music. All right, it's time for our rapid fire response segment of live stream. Oh boy, here we go. And the idea here is that they are rapid fire. John says, do you recall if you discussed John 14, 12 through 14 at any point? I'm not a cessationist and believe that God does miraculous things, but I got into an argument with a friend. They referenced yada, yada, yada. It's not really yada, yada, yada. I'm just trying not to use names. And also John 14, saying that we can do greater miracles than Jesus. I don't believe that's biblical, but my friend is also a fan of some other things and believe they teach that kind of thing. So quick rapid fire response answer, John. Yes, we go through all of John. We go through all of John verse by verse in session 6. I wouldn't recommend skipping ahead if you're not through the first 5 sessions. Once you get through the first 5 sessions, you could skip ahead, but we will go through John 14, 12 through 14. I think you could probably take a hall pass if you wanted to listen to just that passage of John, that section of John. You could probably go find it and do that. But we do that. And yes, I do talk about that verse. It's one of my favorite verses. I do think that we, together as the people of God, do greater things than Jesus, because he told us we would do greater things than him. And I don't think it's about necessarily miracles or that kind of stuff, but that the Holy Spirit dwelling with God's people. Episode 290 is what Brent says that episode is. I'm not doing rapid fire response right now, but it's just a great question. And I'm not a big that means miracles guy. I'm not a big that doesn't mean miracles guy. But I do love that verse. So we'll talk about it there. Sam sent a bunch of messages, by the way. Sam is this. I love how Sam thinks. Sam sees there's like the stuff in the text, but then Sam sees all this other stuff. So there's chiasms as a literary device, but then there are all these conceptual chiasms that Sam points out. Here's one of the messages. Another thought on chiasms, the crux of the matter. I love that. The shape of a chiasm is a cross. Although I don't see this mentioned by others, I believe there are geographical chiasms. You've mentioned that Israel is at the crossroads of the earth. I agree with you. I believe it's a geographical chiasm linking Africa, Asia, and Europe. Medical chiasms involve swapping information at the meeting point of the chiasm. The same thing happens geographically in Israel with swapping of information, commerce, and cultures. Sam talked about the chiasm of the eyeball and how the image comes into the eye and then gets flipped before it hits the back of the eye, and the chiasm's there. And I think it's a beautiful observation. I am always going to stop after, I'm going to deal with the objectivity of literary devices. Because there's a sense of accountability of what something is and isn't. And I know that for me, I'm going to get dangerous when I leave that and start kind of doing conceptual chiasms. And it doesn't mean that you're wrong. I see you have You have an eye for stuff that maybe other people wouldn't necessarily see, and that's beautiful. And there could be deep, deep truth. As a student and as a teacher, I'm going to stay resolute right there. Jordan says, I'm listening to episode 70. I just want to mention that the book of Esther, or portions of it, were recently discovered in the Qumran caves. You are right, Jordan. Since we recorded that, I think they had already been found when we recorded that. But I discovered that truth after we recorded that initial episode, and was like, oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding me. That is relatively recent. So we used to have all the books except for Esther. We now have Esther. We discovered in the Qumran caves the book of Esther. Their findings suggest that Purim may have been celebrated there at Qumran. Very, very juicy. So thanks for that. Jordan Witt says, we sponsor the Bema Milwaukee group. In season 3 and perhaps in season 6, I have a memory that there was an ebook, and only an ebook, it wasn't in print, of how certain chapters of John might have been added later. I haven't been able to locate those in the show notes or elsewhere. Is that a resource you can point me to? I don't remember that, Whit. I don't remember that at all. I don't know if maybe Dr. Gary Burge said something about something like that. It's possible, because we did talk to Dr. Gary Burge about that. And Brent can find the episode where we did the Gary Burge interview, but it wasn't from me. The only ebook that I have recommended would have been in our atonement discussion in session 3, and that would have been A Better Atonement by Tony Jones. That's the only ebook that I have interactions with that I would have recommended. But Dr. Gary Burge might have. I just don't remember it. Andrew says, this is our last rapid fire response. In Marty's book, he mentioned Luke possibly being written as a companion to the synagogue lectionary calendar. I think that'd make for a great devotional guide, but I've done some Googling and can't find anything like that. Can you help me find it? Well, Andrew, you just happen to have stumbled upon a really juicy, fun, deep conversation, and Brent will link you the Luke episode. What you want to do is you want to start by listening to our Luke episode from session 3. And I don't know where you're at in the podcast experience, but you could take a hall pass and jump ahead and listen to that just for this question. In that episode, we're going to link a resource, or talk about a resource where that theory came from academically. It's episode 86, according to Brent. So episode 86 is where you'll find out. What we're going to talk about is a work by a scholar by the name of M.D. Goulder. He wrote a book called The Evangelist Calendar. The book goes for anywhere from $500 to $900 when you have the actual hard copy book. I actually have a copy in my library, and I have the diagram, which has the lectionary. I don't publish it because I feel like it just feels funny for me to like take a photo of it and publish it to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I've been told that if you can get the book at a university library, that you're absolutely allowed to make photocopies of it, take photos of it, all that kind of stuff. Do with that what you will. But that's the source. You also ought to know that in the years that followed, M.D. Goulder was critiqued by another scholar by the name of Goodacre. And Goulder ended up walking back his position, mostly as it pertained to Matthew. I never liked Goulder's Matthew material. I liked Goulder's Luke material. I think Goulder was a genius when it came to Luke. He didn't seem to care about Luke that much. All he wanted to do was write about Matthew. I don't even agree with his walk back. I think he was far too critical and generous to his critics in his walk back. I would have kept where you just need to know all of that exists, because the book you're looking at is kind of ancient. It's kind of a big deal, and a lot of stuff happened. And the more I talk about it, I'll always get like 100 emails of people going like, did you know? Did you know? Did you know? And I do know. I also get a lot of people that tell me, did you know? This is definitely not a rapid fire response. Did you know that it's on Kindle for $10? It is on Kindle for $10, but you don't have the whole diagram for the lectionary. You only have at the most 2/3. You're missing a bottom and you're missing an edge to which is a pretty important, if I remember it, it's actually that's a chunk of it's like 3 months of your calendar you're missing. So the Kindle version doesn't work. It works in part, but not in whole. So do with that what you will. But there you go. That's what you need to know. Here's the other thing I will tell you. HebrewForChristians.com used to have I don't think it followed Goulder's work, but they also have broken up the readings from the Gospels and the New Testament into weekly readings that go along with the parashah readings. So they have a part of their website somewhere. It's been a while since I was on there, but HebrewForChristians.com or .org or whatever it is. And they will have a link to that. I also know that the Complete Jewish Bible, at least the old version with David Stern, definitely not .com. Brent says, I think it might be .org. And that's Hebrew 4 with the number. Sorry. Hebrew number 4 Christians. David Stern's Bible also had the New Testament in its parashah. None of these are like easy to necessarily access or see, but they are out there, and they're the tools that I'm aware of that incorporate the New Testament. But I too, I will eventually do my own daily, weekly reading using Goulder's work. So there you go. I think that's the end of our session, Brent. That was not rapid fire, but I'm going to play the music anyway.
Rapid fire responses.
Oh boy. Oh boy. It's 20 after the hour.
It
Got
was
anything else for me?
actually, it was .com once I got the
Okay.
number 4, the numeral
Sorry.
4.
Yep.
So I did put the link in the chat, but just to verbally
Okay.
acknowledge the situation.
Yep. There you go. Anything else you need to? Your face is on the
No.
screen. You might as well take
Back-
a moment to say something.
I mean, I don't know. Back to the grind, I guess. I don't know.
Back
So,
to
I
the
don't know.
question.
I don't know how we're gonna get through this.
Oh, we got this. Brent, I have no, I'm so ready. Here we go, Alicia. Alicia says, I wanted to ask 2 questions. First, why is the emphasis on trust the story rather than trust God? I love this question. Got this a lot when we got started. And at first, the question used to always annoy me. And now I'm like, oh, I love this question. It's a really good question. And I love to talk about it. Let's deal with that question first. Why is it trust the story rather than trust God? Because what does it mean to trust God? Right? We immediately have a problem. What does it mean to trust God? It's a religious cliche that we all know what we mean, but if I had to explain what I meant, I would have to start putting practical legs on it. Well, I mean, trust in the promises of God. Trust when he said, okay, so where is all this stuff found? It's found in the scripture. Okay, but the scripture is a narrative, and that narrative has to start in the right spot. Because most of us don't trust in God, Alicia. That's the problem. Most of us say trust God, but most of us trust in theology. That's what most of us trust in. And I don't mean that to be like a gotcha statement. I just mean most of us trust in theology. That's the way it goes. It's the way we've built our theological world as Christians. And so we wanted to reorder that. We are saying trust God, and hopefully everybody knows that and picks that up. But by trusting God, we're saying trust in the story that God is telling. God said, here, I want to start my story right here. Here's the beginning of my story. Trust this. That's where the story begins. Sabbath. Trust that there's enough. Trust that creation is good. Trust that I'm for it. Don't lean into your fear and insecurity. Lean into me. But what does that mean? Well, it's going to start with a conversation about Sabbath. Again, not a practice, not a religious practice of Sabbath, but the concept of resting in the goodness of God's creation, resting in the provision of God. So what we mean when we say trust the story is absolutely trust God, but we're trying to put legs to it. So that trust God means something rather than just an abstract cliche that we would say. And when we're pushed on it, we like, well, I mean, you know what it means. No, but what does it mean? What does it mean to trust God? And then we have to come up with like a follow-up explanation. Trust the story is hopefully the right place to begin, just to begin the follow-up explanation. Great question. She also says, second, why would Avram give Lot back the second time? He specifically went there to rescue Lot. Yes, but not. Okay, so let me keep this going. It's like if my kid was kidnapped and I rescued him and others, including some of the kidnapper's family, and the kidnapper says, just give me back my people. So I gave him back everyone, including my son. He wasn't kidnapped. Remember, Lot chose to go to Sodom. So he went to rescue him because the kings were at war. He didn't go to rescue him because Lot was captured. He didn't go to rescue him because Lot was kidnapped. He didn't go to rescue Lot because he went to rescue Lot because he thought he was going to be collateral damage in a war between all of these kings of the plain. And then he's able to rescue Lot. But Lot wanted to live in Sodom. He chose Sodom. He lived in Sodom. And as far as we can tell in the story, he wants to live in Sodom. When we find Lot, the very next time we find Lot, he's at the city gate, which means he's a person of influence. Lot chooses to live in Sodom. And so he's not kidnapped. If he was kidnapped, if he was some situation of abuse or violence or something like that, I think the story would be totally different. But Lot chose to go live there. And if Abraham would have told him to come back and live with him, I'm sure he would have done that. But that's exactly what Abraham is doing. He's going, wait a minute. No, he wants to be. This is where he wants to live. This is where he chose to live. And all you want to do is have your people and have your community. And remember, the king of Sodom wasn't the instigator. You have wars between all the kings of the plain. So they're all going to war. So it's not that the king of Sodom in that story is some horrible individual kidnapper, any of those kind of things. It's that he was engaging in what all the rest of the kings were doing. He ends up getting defeated. At the end of the day, he just wants his people back so he can just rebuild his community. Abraham says absolutely, and Lot is a part, by choice, Lot's a part of your community. Oh, you may, yeah, okay, since she had some stuff to add there. Okay, I'm going to move down. What is this, Ezekiel? This is one of my best friends. One of my best friends is in the chat right now asking questions. What I want to say, Ezekiel/Dallas, is get out of the questions. You don't belong in my questions. You belong right here, drinking a good drink, enjoying some good conversation. What are you doing in my comment thread? All right, let's see what he said. Hello from down under, my brother. What are your thoughts on the divine council? Divine council is a thing. It's a thing that I've learned about a lot in the last 10 years. Dr. Michael Heiser's the expert, I feel like, on divine council. He's written the most out of it. A lot of people know I have grown to love. I'm really sad I didn't get to meet Dr. Heiser before he passed away. I've grown, my love and respect for Dr. Heiser has just grown. When I first met Heiser, I was like, man, this feels really fringe, and I don't really know if it's, but Heiser's brilliant. His scholarship is excellent. I still don't know if the conversation that Heiser is always having is representative of a larger conversation, but for what he's looking at and what he's talking about, it's right, it's good, it's helpful. I think we can make too much of the divine council. I think we can just say, like, this is what's driving all of the, and I'm not sure that's true, but the divine council is definitely a part of the biblical conversation, Second Temple Judaism. It's not my area of expertise. You'll hear me drop it every now and then into a conversation. I do have a few lessons where I think it's super relevant, particularly over in Israel and Turkey, mainly Turkey. But you won't hear me necessarily do a whole bunch. The Bible Project has addressed it as well. Yeah, I think all those conversations are 2 thumbs up, and I think they should have them because I'm not equipped to have them nearly as well as they are. So, Ezekiel, get out of here. Get over here. Get over here to my house. Get over here. Get out of Australia. Come see me. Come say hi. All right. Jervis. Is that how I'm going to say that? Jervis had a question. I have questions regarding the prayer of Jabez. Oh, yeah, I remember this question. Is it a prayer of blessing as presented by Bruce Wilkerson or fictional as presented by Moen? I don't know if I'd say the prayer is fictional. I do think that I have some friends that worked with on the project with Wilkerson. So I'll try to be as generous and as hospitable as I can to that. I just think that what happened with the popular prayer of Jabez work that Wilkerson did is we take these things we find in the text and then we like find some way to try to leverage it and try to make it this spiritual mechanic that does something that accomplishes something that like almost transactional, and it kind of takes it out of its context. It misunderstands it. It's not like this horrible. I don't know. I mean, it's an abuse of the passage, but not in some like horribly there are worse things out there, that's for sure. I don't know if I would just say, oh, it's just fictional. Like, there's a prayer, a character of the Bible, and there are principles in the prayer that I think we could learn from. When we take the principles and we put it in a book and we tell people you should pray this every day. And if you do, God will do X, Y, and Z. That's where we probably are bumping into some. So yeah, prayer of Jabez is a prayer buried in the recesses of, by saying buried, I don't mean it doesn't matter. I just mean it's one section of a larger narrative, of a larger story. And we can see those prayers. It's recorded for a reason and a purpose. We can learn from those prayers. We can see some principles in that prayer that might be instructive. Probably don't want to do a whole lot. It's not some magical incantation. And that's what I think a lot of people did with it. I'm not even sure if Bruce would have intended it to be that way, but that's what a lot of people ended up doing with it. So there you go. Just got rid of I had multiple copies of my Prayer of Jabez book, and I just gave them all away to the Goodwill store. So there you go. Quint says on Facebook, live question, I was watching your teaching about the letter of the church in Tita. You quoted Isaiah 55, and there was a part about seed and sower. Is there a remez there to Jesus' parable on the sower? It's possible. Not my favorite option. There are other seeds. Hosea, break up your unplowed ground and do not sow among thorns. There is other potential passages. Is there one in Jeremiah? There are other passages. Then there are other passages that don't even have to do with necessarily that. There are options. I'll put it that way. There are options. Isaiah 55 is one of them. It's not the one that I think is our best option for the remez, for the parable of the sower. But I love, Quint, where your head is at. And it could be at play. Is it not at play at all? I don't know. Maybe there's some connections there with Isaiah 55. I mean, it's all about the words of God not coming back void. I feel like the sower is a parable about, there's some possible connections there. It's not my favorite, but it's in play. Addison said this, I have listened to season 1 3 times, season 2 twice. I'm almost done with season 3 for the first time. So while I'm technically behind, I have a very important question I've been wrestling with. The Bema has specifically stirred this even more during the lessons of episodes 98 through 103. That said, thank you for this. I'm wrestling with loving people. Yeah, I believe that God has created a good world. I'm doing my best to trust the story and live for the kingdom instead of empire. Admittedly, I know that I must be in his word more than I am and have no excuse to not be in it more. I wrestle with wanting justice more than mercy. Yeah. Today's empire does a great job stirring up emotions and reactions that lead to hate, division, and worry. Amen to that, Addison. I do my best to not allow empire to influence my life, but I would be lying blatantly to say that it doesn't affect me. I live in Milwaukee, and the results of empire are blatantly evident. Everywhere I turn, poverty, division, hate, ideologies. Anyway, I want to love people the way that Jesus did and does. I appreciate that you explained that we are not to throw our pearls before the world, as the world has not signed up to follow Jesus the way that we have. I love that. I love that you remember that. That would have been one of my responses. You're already on top of that. That's excellent. That acknowledged, I understand that we are to be light and or salt to the world and live out our faith in relationship to Jesus. Yeah, absolutely. I would also say, by the way, before we keep going, Addison, keep going. When you get done with session 3, don't go back to session 1 and session 2 and session 3. Keep going, because I think this is what we find. This is why I love to take people over to Turkey, because what we get to study in Turkey is what people did, what the early church did. Like, we spend 2 weeks looking at this question. What did they do? How did they love people? So keep listening to session 4, because I think you'll find some help. It's going to be uncomfortable help. I'll tell you that. From reading your question, it will make you squirm a little. I hope in some good transformative ways. I mean that with all love and compassion. Long story short, I get why we are to love people. I don't understand how we are to love all people. I get the accountability portion of loving those in our inner circle, so our fellow brothers and sisters, but how do we love neighbors that are blatantly doing things that harm others or cultivate destructive morals within our communities? And that's that issue of throwing pearls. I can't just throw my pearls. I can't just tell them this is what God's law says, because they haven't signed up for God's law. So you don't just throw God's truth at them and expect that truth to change them. You're not going to change people's hearts by just putting up a poster or putting up a sign in a courthouse or it's got to change people's hearts through relationship. So you build these relationships with people. And then you also realize that you can't build relationships with everybody. You can't, and our job isn't necessarily to change, it's to see the humanity of other people. And it's to build those relationships and see the humanity, get to know them and see their humanity, not their behavior. To get to learn and hear their stories. Why do they even think the things that they think? Why do they believe the things that they believe? Why do they hold to the ideologies that they hold to? Because when you meet them, when you get to know their names and you get to know their stories, it radically changes what we understand about who they are and why they do what they do. So that'll be a part of it. There'll be no easy answers to this question, by the way, Addison. There's no, how do you love people is not an easy question. But it's going to start with showing up and being present. We actually just did an interview that's not going to post until later this year in season 9, be season 9. I don't even know. It'll post later around the turn of the year. But we did an interview for the podcast with Catherine McNeil, and she wrote one of my favorite books on this, and it's called Fearing Bravely. Did I get that right? The play on Brene Brown's book always throws me off. But she had a book called Fearing Bravely. The subtitle is about learning how to love our friends, our strangers, and our enemies. And I just love, I would say if you want a resource to help, it's very challenging. It's very practical. And it would be a great place to start, especially because you mentioned neighbors, and it's a big part of her book. So Fearing Bravely by Catherine McNeil, MCN, I believe IEL. How do we love our neighbors that are blatantly doing things that harm others or cultivate destructive morals within our communities? I'm not talking about empire, tradition of politics. I'm talking about the adults that are, yeah. And you give some examples here. And I would just say there's going to be different ways of seeing those examples that you give in the question. I can say by reading your question that I probably see some of these things differently than you do. And that's because life is nuanced, and learning some of these stories, morality is not as easy as a code of ethics that we want it to be. So there you go. Brent put a link for that book in the chat. I would just say, get to know your neighbors, see them as human beings, and ask yourself what would lead to their flourishing. And be careful about how our assumptions and our ideologies get in the way of what we think would lead to their flourishing. We always think that other people will flourish when they see the world like I do. That's often not the case. So see that one of the things that we see in Jesus' ministry that's so powerful is Jesus saw the person that was in front of him. Jesus saw the person that he was talking to in their situation. He did not just see a commodity that needed to align to an ethic. He saw a person with a name and a story and circumstances, and he met them there. And so be really careful that we don't think that flourishing means becoming more like me. I would say that. Just reading some of the stuff in your question. What would lead to their flourishing? What would lead to them being a more whole version of who God wanted them to be? What does God see when he looks at them? I think we make a lot of assumptions about what's right and what's wrong. And I think I learned from other people just how little I know and how weird and sticky and odd this whole gospel-centered kingdom is. So there you go. I'll just leave it at that, Addison. It's a wonderful question. That's why I took so much time with it. Joshua says this on YouTube. What advice do you have for anyone who's become a listener or follower of Bema and now finds themselves struggling with reading the Bible? They don't feel like they know how to read the Bible anymore. Yeah, I mean, I would say keep at it, Joshua, on some level. I would say I would say probably what's often happened to a lot of us is we were taught to engage the Bible one way, with one hermeneutic, one way for one reason, one way. Like you do this with the Bible. And so when you stop doing that with the Bible, you're like, well, why would I do the Bible anymore? And so we have to find not only new ways to read the Bible, but new reasons to read the Bible. We have to believe that the Bible is like a lot of kind of what I hear in this question is we kind of get stuck in these in-betweens. Like people talk about deconstruction or whatever word you like to use. Like we've taken apart this old worldview. Like the Bible's not that anymore, but we haven't put it back together. And so we kind of feel like, so what am I supposed to do with that? And there's really, really good. There's more beautiful answers on the other. So just keep going, keep wrestling with that question of keep reading great books on what the Bible is, and what it's meant to do. If you're like a real Bible nerd, read Robert Alter on the art of biblical narrative or the art of biblical poetry. Read all of Alter's books on the Bible if you're really nerdy and you like to get into that. If you're not quite that nerdy, read some Peter Enns on how the Bible works, the sin of certainty. Read that. If you're even less nerdy than that, read Rachel Held Evans when she talks about inspired. Or God forbid, read Rob Bell on what is the Bible. Read some things that would give you a new perspective on what is this book and how does it operate? Why am I reading it? Not just how, but why. For me, the scriptures are this Isaiah 55, what we were just talking about a moment ago. It's the rain and the snow falls from the heavens, doesn't return to it without watering the earth, causing it to bud and to flourish, providing seed for the sower and bread for the eater. So my word goes forth from my mouth. It never returns to me empty. It always accomplishes its purpose and the desire for which I sent it. That's Isaiah 55. God says, my words, there's this efficacy to them. They accomplish. There's something special about God's words. And so for me, I'm not analyzing them to learn data, to learn truth. I'm not trying to, I'm reading these stories to be challenged, transformed, provoked, but I'm also putting these stories inside of me because I literally believe there's something special about these stories that I won't find in Tolkien. And Tolkien's amazing. I won't find them in other pieces of literature because they're not, this is what I mean when I say inspired. They're God-breathed. Like there's a source, there's an origin to these stories that makes them transformative and powerful. It's not just an answer book. It's not just me defending my theology or proof text to a worldview. This is the living God. It's one of many ways. It's one of many ways that the living God gets inside of me and lives in me and through me in the world. That's why I go to these stories. That's why I memorize every morning. I memorize these verses. I memorize this book to get that book in me, because this book is able to give people hope. This book is able to stop people in their tracks. This book is able to make people think and then think again. And other books can do that. I understand that. This book, though, this book, when read the right way, and I think maybe, Joshua, you might be, I'm making assumptions. You might just be stuck in an in-between. The Bible used to be this, and it's becoming less and less this. And you just haven't quite figured out where you land. And it's just going to be next, because from there you'll go and you'll land somewhere else. And you'll land. That's just what growth looks like. That's just what the evolution of your own soul and your own development, your own spiritual formation. That's just what it looks like. So you're just kind of in the in-between until you find the next place where you'll land for now. And then you'll find the next place and the next place and the next place. So there's probably like 100 more things that I should say to that. And when I fall asleep tonight, I will like, my eyes will jerk awake and be like, that's what I should have said to Josh. Lisa says this: I was re-listening to episode 1 in Genesis 1. I heard Marty say that the Israelites would have heard the creation story for the first time while wandering in the wilderness post-slavery in Egypt. Is there a reason why they wouldn't have heard the creation story passed down through oral tradition? If not, than was their first time to hear the creation story in the wilderness, because Moses most likely wrote the Torah, and when he received revelation of the story from God to write it, he also told the Israelites. It's a great question, Lisa, and there's lots of ways to look at it. First of all, let's just look at it with like a traditional, the typical way we've heard it, maybe more historical, maybe more literal lens. Yes, I think we have to assume that these stories that end up in Torah are stories that have been passed down from their ancestors. So they knew the stories of Abraham, they knew the stories of creation through their ancestors that got passed down. And that's how those things got passed down. And eventually Moses does write them down, and he writes down some stories and not others. And he writes them down in a particular way. And I think that's what we were talking about. When we talk about the fact, it's not that they heard the story for the very first time at Sinai. It's a good question. It's that they heard this particular telling of the story this way at the foot of Mount Sinai. Traditionally speaking, Torah is given by Moses at Sinai. So the first time, in a really crude, rudimentary sense, the very first time they heard the chiasm. I mean, maybe their ancestors told the story as a chiasm. I don't know, maybe. But the inspired version that we have in Torah, the chiasm of Torah, they encountered, traditionally speaking, for the first time at Sinai. Now, on the other side, you're going to have textual academics, Bible nerds, historians that are going to probably offer some rebuttals to the, do you really think that Moses wrote the Bible at Mount Sinai, the books of Moses, the Torah? And I'm with it, but keep wrestling, Lisa, because the time you get a little bit later in the story, I think if you're like me, you're going to be like, oh yeah, Moses probably didn't physically write the books. But I, in my mind's eye, as I see it, as I think about it, as I believe the story, I'll give Moses credit for the books of Moses. It was an oral culture. You didn't do a whole lot of writing down. You didn't do a whole lot of putting things on parchment. It just wasn't how you cataloged information. You told stories. It's why the stories are told the way that they are. It's why Hebrew uses so much poetry. It's why there's so much song. It's why Hebrew's a guttural language. It's why you don't have just a bunch of like just stories and narrative prose, but you have dialogue that's almost sing-songy, because it helped you in your memorization. It helped you tell these stories again and again. It's why chiasms are so helpful. It's why literary devices existed, because it was largely an oral transmission, not a written transmission. So when did the Bible literally get written down? We'll talk about that later in session 3, and we'll all wrestle with that. Who knows? But the answer to your question is yes. Sure. I think they've probably heard these stories. Maybe they've heard these stories told in many different ways. But then one day Moses writes it down, literally or metaphorically, and he brings it to them for the first time at Mount Sinai. And they hear, and that's what we meant when we said that. So it's a really good question. It's a good clarifying question. Oh, Dylan is with us as usual. YouTube, Dylan says, how are we to interact with other religions' claims of who and what is important? I don't know. Other people have lots of things to say. I always think it's fun to listen and care about other people, listen to what other people say. I think there's often a lot of beautiful truth in lots of wonderful places. And I think we can learn all kinds of fun things from those places. So how are we to interact with other religions' claims of what? Well, a lot of times other religions have beautiful things to say, and even at times things that we can learn from. And I don't believe that all religions are the same thing. Like, I do believe there's something unique and very special about my faith, particularly the person of my faith, not my faith in just as a faith movement or an expression, but the person of Jesus. But the thing about Jesus is, I don't think Jesus is only hanging out in Christianity. Like, I think Jesus is probably, if I've learned anything about the Christian Bible, it's that God and Jesus are like out there doing all kinds of crazy things. They're coloring outside the lines. They're showing up in all kinds of other people's stuff. So I would expect that. I would expect that Jesus is out there doing other things too. I like the version of the story I've been handed. I like this story that was told. I think there's something unique about our story of Avram. think there's something unique about our book. I just got done saying that. I think there's something very unique about our book that I don't think is true about other books. I don't mean that to be some arrogant, exclusive claim. I think there's beautiful things I can learn and beautiful life in other books too. I just think there's something special about the resurrected Christ. I do. I'm saying that just so that I can say that gives me the freedom to learn from all kinds of places. Because I know that what I'm putting my hope and my faith and what I'm planting my feet in is the resurrected Jesus, the resurrected Christ, the world of the Hebrew scriptures and the world of the apostles and the apostles' teaching. Like, that's where I'm planting my feet. So I'm free to like listen to all kinds of stuff and learn all kinds of things and consider all kinds of stuff and honor and respect other people. What I've always found so interesting is that I was trained and raised in a world that said, well, you believe in the resurrected Jesus, don't you? Yeah. Well, you believe the Bible is the inspired. Yeah. Well, that means everything else is garbage. That means like we have to exclude and like fight and prove our stuff and deprove. I don't have to deprove their stuff. And honestly, I don't even have to prove our stuff. Like, there'll be times where some of those conversations might be helpful, but like my feet are firmly planted in the resurrection. Like, I'm big fan of Jesus. I love the story of the Hebrew scriptures. I know Jesus. I know Jesus. Like, I know Jesus. Like, he's like personally. Like, I have a personal relationship with Jesus. There's an old cliche for you. So I don't need to worry. Like, how can I interact with the religion's claims? I can listen to it. I can consider it. And some of those claims, I'll be like, maybe there's some good stuff there. Maybe there's some truth there, but I don't know. Probably not. Some things I'm going to hear and be like, yeah, you know what? Jesus said something like that. That's the other thing. It's half the stuff that I can hear. I'll be like, yes, Jesus already taught us this. Jesus taught us that. Yeah, absolutely. Those are some things that I think, yeah. I can give some examples, but all I'm going to do is just make people upset. So how do we interact with other religions' claims of who? And the last thing I'm going to do is fight with them. The last thing I'm going to try to do is, and I'm not saying, Dylan, at all, you're suggesting that. I don't think your question assumes that at all. I just, what do I do about other people? I listen to it, consider it. What are you saying? What are you saying? What are you really saying? It's not like I walk around in a world. I don't know if you guys are different, but I don't walk around like in a world where everybody's coming up to me going like, I've got a religious claim for you. Yeah, maybe socio-politically, like ideologies. I guess I'm bumped up against that all the time, but I don't have like Buddhists walking up to me all the time like, hey, I've got a claim for you. What do you think? What are you going to do with this? Or, I don't have conversations with Mormons or Jehovah's Witness. Like those just aren't something that happen a whole lot in my life. The only people that I know that do that is us. We're the ones that are always like, did you know that you're a sinner? I have some religious claims about where you're going to spend all of eternity. Like that's something that we do, but I don't know if I've ever had anybody else necessarily. So I don't really, it's a really good question, Dylan. I don't mean to say it's not a good question. I'm just not sure I've had to deal with that a whole lot. I've spent most of my life going, what do I do with all the people that say they're part of the thing that I'm a part of? Like pushing their claims in ways that aren't helpful. Anyway, I don't know. Do with that what you will. Am I getting myself in trouble yet? Probably. Peter says, I was just listening to episode 194, hearing that Constantine's dad was born on December 25th. I probably said that. It's an oversimplification. Let me read the rest of your question. Being flabbergasted by this fact, I was wondering why I'd never heard this before, checking if at least Wikipedia mentioned it. However, I couldn't find the reference of this birth date. Most sources state that the birth date to be unknown. Absolutely. We don't know what his actual birth date was. What Rome is always doing is Rome is always going to take some kind of pagan practice, align it with some other celebration, typically imperial rulership, and they're going to mush these things together. So Constantine's dad was Chlorus. Chlorus was the last emperor to claim to be Mithra incarnate. You need to also know it's very sexy today to deny all of this stuff. So here's the trajectory we've been on. We've been on a trajectory from Christianity was like pre-conventional wisdom just said Christianity changed the world. And then everybody woke up to the fact that there's all this pagan, like there's all these pagan roots to a lot of Christian practice. And that doesn't mean that the Christian practice is pagan. It might have been attempt to reclaim something. There's a lot of ways to parse that. But now the sexy thing is to be like, no, Christians have made all that up to beat up on paganism. And okay, so just know that as we get started, Peter, okay? But as I see history, Chloris claimed to be Mithra incarnate. Mithra is the worship of the zodiac and is connected to the solstice system. Usually Mithra will always be connected to the spring and summer solstice of March and June. But there were other versions of that worship, some of it being Sol Invictus. So what you do want to look for, we don't know when Chloris's birthday was, his actual birthday. What they did eventually was they celebrated his birthday whenever his actual birthday was. They celebrated his birthday on Sol Invictus because it connected him to the myth of Mithra, Zoroastrianism. So Brent has added that link from Wikipedia for Sol Invictus to the chat. So read through that. It's not going to be about Chloris or Constantine's father. It's going to be about Sol Invictus. However, I believe there's a section in that Wikipedia article that specifically references Constantine, that whole era. And that's what they're tying. That's what they're tying Sol Invictus. That's what they're tying the Advent that I referenced. What I referenced was an oversimplification of a much, much larger conversation. So there you go. I hope that was somewhat helpful. It's really tricky. And what I did was I simplified it for the sake of teaching, oversimplified it, and then people make absolutely reasonable assumptions based on how I worded things. And we don't know when his actual birthday was, but they linked his celebration. So then when Constantine becomes emperor, they already have a celebration for his father linked to Sol Invictus. So it's easy for him to link another celebration, Christmas, and a new Christmas Advent to an Advent that already existed for his father's celebration with Sol Invictus. There you go. Winter solstice, darkest time of the year, fits well with the Advent theme, Brent says. Absolutely. All right, we got two more. We got a live question, and then we got one last question in here. Christine says, throughout the podcast, you state God is looking for partners. Have you ever talked about why God wants partners? I've binged up to season 6 since January, so I could have missed it. I did, not really in depth. But I have mentioned it a couple of times, but nothing in depth. So it would have been easy to miss, Christine. But I think God wants partners because there's something about redemption. God's not just wanting to fix problems. He's wanting us to join him in our own redemption. So I used to tell this story when I was younger. I remember I used to teach this class. It was like Alpha course. It's for new believers. And they would come to church, they would join the church and get baptized and whatever. And then we would take them through this class. And so we were always teaching them like the basics of the faith. And one of the conversations that always comes up in those new believer classes is people always ask the question, like, why do bad things happen to good people? And I remember we had a group there was 3 single moms and a divorced guy in this group. And one of the single moms had a teenage son that had just gotten his driver's license. And I asked her, I said, listen, imagine this scenario. Your son just got his driver's license. He actually takes the car tonight. He goes down to the hardware store. He fills the trunk of your Honda Civic with all the spray paint he can buy. And she was an elementary teacher at the local school. He drives down to the elementary school where you are a teacher, and he breaks windows, he spray paints and graffitis just trashes the place, just trashes this elementary school that you work at. And I said, now in this fictional world, I said, you have all the resources. You have endless resources. You could snap your fingers and have a brand new school, a better school built by Monday. I said, is that what you do? And she says, absolutely not. Without even hesitating, she's like, no way. I'm like, why? She says, because I got it. Like, my son has to be a part. And I'm like, so what are you going to do? And she's like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to get some soap and I'm going to get some buckets and I'm going to get some scrub brushes. I'm going to grab my son. I'm going to throw him in that Honda Civic. We're going to drive down to the school and we're going to clean up that school ourselves. I said, oh, so there's something redemptive about being a part of the cleanup project. There's something redemptive. It's not just about fixing the problem, because there's no redemption in just fixing the problem. The redemption comes in the process of putting the things back together. It's where some, not all, it's where some of the transformation happens. I think that's one way to explain why God's looking for partners. The other reason is that God just wants help. He's always been in this for relationship. Why do I want a partner? Like, and I know that not everybody, this isn't some statement about marriage and singleness and all that stuff. But I know that in my life, I wanted a partner. Why did I want a partner? Because life is, for some of us, more effective, more fun, more enjoyable, more, I don't know, more lots of things, more vibrant, more colorful with a partner. I think all those things are true about God. And I think it's a wonderful question. But there's something about this thing that God is doing. It's like, hey, I don't just want to fix this. I could do that. I would rather, like, can we go hang this? Like, I know people, this is not me, but I know people who want to buy the fixer-upper because they want to work on the project together. This is not me. I want to buy the house that's been flipped. Thank you very much. God's not a flipper. Or actually, he is. God actually wants to do the project of flipping with us. Like, he wants to change the faucets. He wants to tear up the floor. He wants to, because there's something redemptive in it for all of us, There's something about the reconciliation in there. All right, it's past the hour. I'm going to do this last question. That was a really good question, Christine. I feel like I want to talk about that for the next 40 minutes. My family and I recently left a legalistic church we grew up in. And did I say Aaliyah? This might be Elijah. Who knows who this is? We'll call them A-Money. It's been such a powerful impact on us, this church, that they recently left. So it's had a mostly positive impact. It's hard to feel at home in any other church we visit. Our biggest concern is knowing if a group is a good church or not, that it's biblical and has God's blessing. We want a church that is Bible and Jesus centered. Yeah, sure, absolutely. And on some level, we kind of all do. How do we know if a church is good or not? Well, it matters. What we're really talking about is if the people, the community, the faith community, is it good? Do they have a good heart? Are they doing good things and good work? It's not the only question that's going to matter, because of what you go on to say. Al says this. The church, I don't know if Al, I'm just making up words now. The church we grew up in met in homes. In case you were part of like a home church that taught, it was the only true way. Even though we don't believe that anymore, it makes visiting new churches overwhelming because we're not accustomed to how other churches worship. We're not used to live bands, having a pastor, which I love that. Like, that's new to you. Like, having a pastor would be a wild idea. Or sitting in pews. Any guidance on what to look for in churches to help find good places to worship would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, you might be able to find other churches that worship in similar ways if that's important to you. There are home church networks in almost everywhere. A lot of times they can be pretty dysfunctional too. So it can be a little tricky. But you might want to pay attention. I'm just going to call you Al because I don't know if it's Aaliyah or Elijah or what it is. So I'm just going to say Al. Sorry. The one thing I would pay attention to, Al, is like the stuff that just doesn't, like, megachurch might not be for you. Like, I'm not here for the live bands, the smoke machines, the 3,000 people, the loud music, that might not be for you. And you just need to know that, like, nope, we're not doing that. It may be the right place for you, because it's like, this is totally different, but I can also kind of like disappear, blend in, get to meet a couple people and just kind of be anonymous. And that's how my soul will be fed. It's probably not, but it could be. It could be. But if you're going to those spaces and you're like, I don't get this does not, then don't. Do not force that kind of interaction. So find the places where you're like, okay, this is different. It's probably going to be different. I'll put it that way. Whatever you find is probably going to be different, but it will be like, okay, but this is good. This is different, but good. It might be a small little mainline church in an old building with stained glass windows. And you're like, well, I've never done buildings and I don't really know what it is to have a pastor or a priest. But there's only like 30 people here and they do potlucks after church on Sunday. And it's not the thing that most of us would look for, but it's going to be like just the right thing for you. And yeah, just know that there's like 40 million, there's like literally 40,000 different denominations and faith expressions, and everything from how we worship to how we do communion and how we see sacraments to how we see the function of the church to how we do relationships and how ecclesiology works and denominational or non-denominational and spiritual gifts and speaking in tongues. And like, there's going to be so many things. Some of them are going to mesh with you in ways that are like, again, it's different, but this makes sense to me. This resonates to me. And you're going to go to some places, you're going to be like, I don't know. I don't understand this. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means for you. So try some things and pay attention to the places that feel, they're probably all going to feel weird, but pay attention to the places that feel less weird or maybe good weird. Do not force the places that feel bad weird. Don't do that. Yeah, so it's going to be a slog, and a lot of us have gone through it. And then Jeff said, listen to the earlier part of this live stream, I think, again. One can have pure orthodoxy without any holy orthopraxy. If they aren't walking the talk, it might not be a good church. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it does take time. And so many of us have been on that journey. Just keep at it. Keep at it as a discipline. Like, keep at it as a work of faithfulness, because eventually you find the right place. And it might take you, I mean, I don't want to say years, but it might take you years. It might take you months and years to find the place that you eventually are like, all right, this is our next stop for a while. That's normal. That's a big deal. We're talking about taking your life, your family, your spiritual identity, your spiritual formation, and syncing it up with another group of people that are trying to follow Jesus. And we're all trying to follow Jesus differently. So you want to find the people that are following Jesus in generally similar ways that you can be like, yeah, I'll get caught up in this stream. It's not going to be perfect. It's always going to be a little broken, a little messy. But I'll jump in this canoe because this is going the way. This is the kind of ride I want. It's going the way I want to go. So there you go. All right, everybody. That is it. Our next Q&A is Monday, August 12th. Monday, August 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here in the same spot. I'm going to try on Monday night and see how it works.
Hopefully also Twitter that time. We'll see what happens if we can sort that out.
We'll see if we can get Twitter up and rolling.
We only left 4 questions on the cutting room floor, Marty.
I told you we were going to do okay.
Okay. You did pretty good.
Yeah. Cheers, Brian. Cheers to that.
Such violence. Late stage listeners of Bama will understand all of the football talk that goes on between Marty and Reed Dent and Brian in the background, and it gets a little saucy, but it's funny.
Well, they've won 3 Super Bowls. They can deal with it.
I can't believe you acknowledged that live on air, Marty. Unbelievable.
They send me the picture of their 3 rings on their hand like every 4 minutes, so. I know.
No, Joshua, it is not preseason football. It better not be.
No, but we're getting close. We're a few weeks away.
As evidence of all the people we have watching, we have a wide variety of teams already represented in the comments. I don't want to show too much preference and list them all off, but there's probably somebody on our staff who will be with you on any teams you might mention. We have a wide variety of people, so everybody gets a hard time.
Yep.
All right, Marty, are we out of here?
I think we're out of here. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you in August
12th.